Welcome to Mindset Matters Book Club YouTube channel. Please subscribe and like to hear new book summaries. Today we are undertaking a really crucial deep dive into a transformative book, one that really challenges everything we thought we knew about the relationship between, physical sensation, our mental state, and actual relief.
We are. The book is Mindfulness and Self-Compassion for Chronic Pain by Dr. Christiane Wolf, and it's genuinely revolutionary. It's presented as a physician's prescription for natural pain relief, but really its core power is in the profound perspective shift it asks of the reader.
Absolutely. And Dr. Wolf combines her expertise as a physician with her work as a meditation teacher. This is actually a revised edition of her earlier book, Outsmart Your Pain. And the foreword, which is penned by the renowned Daniel J. Siegel, MD, it just makes the mission crystal clear from page 1. These aren't just coping mechanisms.
No, not at all. He says they can fundamentally transform how you live with pain. And what's so fascinating is that this applies whether the pain is purely physical somatic or, even social and emotional pain.
That's the part that really got me. Dr. Siegel makes the point that if pain, any kind of pain, an injury, or the sting of social rejection, if it's all processed in the same part of the brain,
the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex.
Right. Then our ability to manipulate our own mental processes, our intention, our meditative practice, it must be able to shape that experience.
It has to. The science backs this up. We can literally train our minds to diminish the perceived intensity of the discomfort. We can decrease how the brain even prioritizes that pain signal in the first place.
And if there was ever a moment in history that required this kind of shift in approach, it is right now. I mean, we're grappling with an unprecedented epidemic of chronic pain.
And that's coupled with the deeply tragic opioid crisis. Now, pharmacological solutions have been, and they still are, a blessing for acute issues, no question, but for long-term chronic management.
The side effects are massive. Unwanted side effects, with addiction being just the most devastating one.
That realization has forced a massive pivot within the medical community. I mean, way back in 2016, the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, they issued recommendations that clearly stated a preference for non-pharmacologic therapy.
So things other than pills.
Exactly. Non-pharmacologic and non-opioid pharmacologic therapy for chronic pain. This official guidance is essentially a stamp of approval. It underscores why practices like mindfulness and self-compassion aren't just, supplementary anymore.
They're paramount. They're central to effective treatment today. And this deep dive is really our roadmap to understanding exactly why that is.
Okay, let's unpack the science behind this shift, because this is where the conventional wisdom really starts to break down. For decades, medicine operated under what's called the biomedical model.
Right. And for an acute injury like a broken leg, it works great. It's a fantastic model for that.
Simple cause and effect.
Exactly. A very outdated mechanistic view. Linear cause and effect. You have tissue damage, which equals pain. The body is a machine. You go to a specialist. They fix a specific part with a pill or a procedure. And the enormous human cost of that model was that if doctors couldn't find a mechanical reason, a reason on a scan or in a lab test,
the pain was dismissed. It was often labeled as psychosomatic.
Which in practice really just translates to it's all in your head and therefore it's not real. It was so incredibly invalidating for millions of people.
It was. But now the transition to the current standard, the biopsychosocial model, it finally gives credence to the full, messy reality of being a human.
I love that, the messy reality.
It's what it is. This model, which is now endorsed by the International Association for the Study of Pain, the IASP, it views chronic pain as something far more complex. The IAST defines it as an unpleasant sensory and emotional experience associated with actual or potential tissue damage.
Emotional experience, that's the key phrase right there.
It is. The definition goes on to say it's profoundly influenced by biological, psychological, and social factors. So it moves the conversation away from the body as a separate machine.
And toward the human being as a whole. Complex, interconnected, and crucially, an empowered participant in their own healing. Yeah. You're not just handing over all authority anymore.
Exactly. So let's drill down into the brain, because it's the central processing unit for all of this. We mentioned the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex is the neurological home base for pain. So what message is this region sending when it lights up?
It's an alarm bell.
It's a priority alarm, yeah. The message is always the same. This is important, it's uncomfortable, and it must be corrected. But the input signals it's receiving, That's what often tricks us. What we all call pain receptors are actually, neurologically speaking, danger or threat receptors. They're called nociceptors.
Okay, so they're not measuring the level of damage, they're measuring the level of threat. That is a huge distinction.
It's everything. These nociceptors send these complex threat signals to the brain that sound less like a precise measurement and more like, a warning system.
Like a smoke alarm, not a thermometer.
Perfect analogy. The signal is something like, something could be dangerous here, or maybe something coming from this area has been dangerous in the past, so we should be hypervigilant. Or sometimes it's just, I can't make sense of this signal, so let's just assume it's a threat to be safe.
So the signal itself is about potential danger or past trauma, not necessarily current active tissue damage that needs fixing right this second.
Precisely. And the brain is the ultimate decider. It takes all those complex inputs and interprets them based on a huge array of factors. Your past experiences, your beliefs about pain, your current stress levels, your emotional state, and then it decides A, if the danger signal is relevant right now, and B, how much pain or along to produce. Pain is, at the end of the day, the brain's interpretation and its production.
This makes so much sense of the difference between acute and chronic pain. Acute pain, the short-term kind, is protective. It makes you drop the hot pan, it correlates directly with the injury. But chronic pain, it's the opposite, isn't it?
It's often overprotective. The brain literally learns pain. It gets better or more efficient at detecting potential danger over time. And this is where that direct linear link between the injury and the pain severity just gets lost.
So you could have a lot of damage on an MRI, but not much pain, or vice versa.
Countless studies confirm this. The degree of spinal degeneration on an MRI scan cannot reliably predict how much back pain a patient has, or even if they have pain at all. That discrepancy proves the protective mechanism has just gone into overdrive.
And this learning process, the core idea of neuroplasticity, it's both the source of the problem and, thankfully, the source of the solution. If the brain changes based on what it does repeatedly,
then constantly sending danger signals creates chronic pain. But we can change that script. The incredible upside is that the same neuroplasticity allows us to train the brain to adopt better habits around pain. We can unlearn this chronic, unnecessary protective habit.
and this was beautifully validated in that big 2022 study on chronic lower back pain, the one that focused on pain reprocessing therapy, or PRT.
Yes, the study led by Ashar, Gordon, and Schubiner. The results from that study are, well, they're almost unbelievable when you compare them to the success rates for standard chronic pain treatments.
What were the numbers?
After just 4 weeks of this intensive therapy, 66% of patients were pain-free or almost pain-free.
66%. That's staggering.
It really is. And the best part, that effect was largely maintained a full year later. This isn't just about managing pain. For many, it's about a functional, long-term reversal of the pain experience.
I think for anyone listening who might be a bit wary of a psychological cure, we need to understand the mechanism. What are the core principles of PRT that Dr. Wolf's book supports?
There are 2, and they align perfectly with mindfulness. First, you have to learn to perceive the internal sensations of the pain as harmless. You're reframing the sensation from a catastrophe alarm to just simple, neutral information.
Okay, so step 1 is changing the meaning of the signal.
Right. And step 2 is you have to learn to feel those sensations directly instead of what we usually do, which is retreating into thinking about the pain, because that's where the fear and the stories and the catastrophizing all live.
So that shift from intellectual, fearful thinking about the pain to just objectively, non-threateningly feeling the sensation, that's what convinces the brain to finally dial down the alarm system.
That's it, exactly. The brain is basically saying, wait a minute, this input isn't being accompanied by the usual panic and avoidance. Maybe it's not a relevant threat anymore. And the book gives some really crucial criteria that suggest your pain might indeed be neuroclastic, which gives you an indicator of whether this approach is likely to be really effective for you.
What are those key indicators we should watch out for?
It's often about the context of the pain. For instance, if the pain started without a clear physical injury, or if it began during a period of really high stress or trauma, that's a big one. Another classic sign is strong pain fluctuation based on your emotions. If the pain gets a lot better when you're happy or relaxed or absorbed in something you love, but it spikes when you're stressed or alone, that's a huge clue.
And it's especially common in certain personality types.
Yes, people who are prone to worry or perfectionism, or those who have a history of difficult childhood experiences. Essentially, if your brain has been wired for threat since an early age, it's more likely to develop these overprotective pain habits.
This brings us to a distinction that is maybe the most central concept in the entire book, moving from pain, the physical sensation, to suffering, which is the mind's contribution. The meditation teacher Shinzen Young gave us that powerful formula to separate them.
Yes, suffering equals pain multiplied by resistance.
Pain times resistance.
That formula is the essential mechanism of all our distress. Pain is inevitable. It's the first arrow, as they say in Buddhism. But suffering is the magnification of that distress caused by the mind's resistance to accepting the sensation as it is right now. So if your resistance is 0, then your suffering is 0, even if your physical pain level is, say, an 8 out of 10.
That is the ultimate challenge right there. For someone listening who feels betrayed and just overwhelmed by their body, the idea of reducing resistance probably sounds a lot like giving up the fight.
It's a crucial question, and it speaks to the paradox. Acceptance in this context is not passive resignation. It is not giving up. It is the deliberate, active choice of opening yourself to things exactly as they are in this one moment. The fight, the resistance, that's all the mental energy we waste trying to make reality different than it currently is. By dropping that fight, you radically reduce the resistance factor, and you thereby reduce the suffering. It's a strategy of engagement, not retreat.
And the power of that is so clear when we look at examples of pain without suffering.
Precisely. We all know it's possible. I mean, think about the intense pain of pushing through the last few reps of a really hard workout. It hurts, but you feel exhilarated, right?
Or getting a tattoo.
Or getting a tattoo. The sensation is still intense, but it's not interpreted as threatening or scary. It's seen as necessary for a desired outcome. Because the goal is clear and positive, the resistance is low, and the suffering is minimized. That's exactly what we're training ourselves to do with chronic pain. So, since we've established that training the mind is the key to reducing that resistance factor, let's detail the 2 fundamental practices Dr. Wolf champions: mindfulness and self-compassion.
Okay, so mindfulness. It's often misunderstood as just, relaxing or trying to empty your mind of all thoughts. But the book gives a much more rigorous definition.
It does. It defines mindfulness as a friendly, open, non-judgmental awareness of what's happening in the present moment. It allows sensations, thoughts, or emotions to be experienced non-reactively. It's about being fully present with your life, observing what's happening without automatically throwing that filter of fear or negative assumptions onto it.
And the specific scientific lever mindfulness pulls is its influence on the default mode network, the DMN. For a listener who isn't a neuroscientist, how do we translate the DMN into something they can relate to?
Think of the DMN as the brain's autopilot. It's the network that governs our self-referential thinking, that endless loop of me, my past, my future, and all our habitual responses. When chronic pain is involved, the DMN is constantly running the program of fear and avoidance. It creates automatic avoidance patterns, and it amplifies our natural negativity bias, making sure we're always focused on the worst possible outcomes.
So the DMN is what's running that loop of pain needs a bad future, I'm defective, I must worry.
That's the one. And if chronic pain is driven by this overactive autopilot of worry and threat, then mindfulness is the act of consciously switching that autopilot off.
That's a great analogy.
Instead of falling into that emotional reactive processing where the pain instantly triggers a catastrophic fear story about missing work or losing your career, mindfulness redirects us. It interrupts the DMN's narrative. We move from identifying with the pain, which the DMN creates as my pain, to perceiving it as just simple, non-threatening sensory information. We get curious about the sensations themselves rather than automatically running the fear story that comes with them.
Okay, that brings us to self-compassion. This is another one that, for a lot of people, sounds like self-indulgence or maybe even a little self-pitying. How does Dr. Wolf define it as a therapeutic tool?
Self-compassion is the deliberate practice of bringing a loving, caring, or kind presence to a painful experience. And the book highlights a really profound point here. This self-generated kindness can provide the exact same therapeutic benefit as receiving genuine compassion from a loved one.
So you can give that to yourself.
You can. It's a literal, biological, physiological intervention.
And what are the core components that make it work?
There are 2 main pillars. The first is just a kind awareness of the pain itself. Acknowledging that the experience is hard, with the same tenderness you'd spontaneously show a friend who was struggling. And the second, which is often more powerful, is the knowledge of shared humanity. This means understanding that suffering and pain are universal parts of the human condition. This instantly reduces the sense of isolation that chronic pain creates.
And that shared humanity piece is what distinguishes it so clearly from self-pity. They get confused all the time.
They are complete opposites in their effect. Self-pity is a massive contraction. It focuses intensely on personal unfairness and isolation, the why me, woe is me story, and it makes us feel worse. Our whole world collapses around us.
While self-compassion is an expansion.
It's a total expansion. Self-compassion acknowledges the difficulty, this hurts, but then it immediately expands the view to the universal struggle. This is what it feels like to be human when the body is struggling. It's not patronizing. It acts like a kind hug, a recognition that all human beings experience this. It's an act of courage.
I really appreciate that the book tackles the common misconception that self-compassion is weak or soft, especially through the story of Liam, the combat veteran.
Liam's story is so important. He embodied that resistance to being soft. He suffered from severe chronic pain, hearing loss, tinnitus, all from his time in the Iraq War. His entire training was be tough at all costs. He genuinely feared that being kind to himself would mean giving up his resilience, his identity as a strong person.
But his body was already failing him. That approach wasn't working.
Not at all. Ignoring the pain or berating himself was just compounding his anger. When he finally learned to practice self-compassion, the result was immediate and profound. He noticed his pain intensity actually decreased. His furious anger about a situation, which was constantly putting his nervous system in fight or flight, was reduced. Kindness turned out to be the active skill that made him more resilient, not less.
And that idea of supportive touch, tactile kindness, is such a simple, immediate tool you can use.
It's vital because it makes the feeling tangible. Simple practices like placing a hand on your heart or your belly, or even just secretly squeezing your own hand in your lap, it signals support and connection directly to the body. It bypasses the thinking mind entirely. It's always available.
Building on that, the ultimate goal seems to be changing our identity relationship with the pain. The phrase, "you are not your pain," is the core principle here.
It is. Humans naturally seek identity through our roles, our jobs, our family status, and we extend this to chronic states. We internalize it. The subtle but crucial shift we make is moving from I am experiencing pain to the devastating I am the pain, or I am a pain patient.
And when you internalize pain as your identity, the implications feel so permanent, it feels like a fundamental flaw, like you're stuck or broken.
That identification severely restricts your world because the defect seems to be you, not just an experience you're having. The book shares the case of Allie, and it illustrates this perfectly. She suffered from serious back pain after some unsuccessful surgeries, which forced her onto disability. She felt hopeless, anxious, and she told Dr. Wolf, "It feels like I'm broken now. It feels like the pain is a kind of monster that has become me." She had completely merged her identity with broken pain person.
So how do you even begin to separate that? How do you detangle the me from the experience?
The book introduces two major shifts. The first is using impersonal language. So instead of saying, "I'm in pain," which reinforces the self-identity, or "I hate my back pain," which reinforces resistance, Allie practiced saying internally, "This is a moment of pain."
Or even just back pain.
Or just back pain, exactly. This simple linguistic shift creates immediate detachment. Allie reported that this detached perspective felt lighter, not so close up, not so personal. It fostered relief because the burden wasn't defining her anymore.
And the second shift is a powerful cognitive move, the observer paradox, asking if the part of you that is aware of the pain is also in pain.
This is a direct challenge to that DMN self-referential trap. When Allie was guided through this, slowing down and just noticing the awareness itself, she had this incredible realization that her awareness was not suffering. The observing part of her mind was separate, quiet, untouched by the sensation being observed. By intentionally shifting the load of her attention from being in pain to the objective awareness of pain, she realized the pain was just something she experienced. It didn't define her at all. It's the first taste of real freedom.
That moment must feel like dropping a massive weight, which is the perfect metaphor for the next critical concept, the pain story, the heavy backpack.
The pain story is that mental habit of constantly rehashing the past and anxiously rehearsing the future. It prevents us from ever being fully present. The past story covers everything: how the pain started, the bad luck, the mistakes we blame ourselves for, if only I hadn't lifted that box, and the injustice of it all. And the future story is all the catastrophizing, anticipating the difficulty of the next hour, plus the long-term worry about your career, finances, being a burden on your family.
And this combination, the mind's endless narrative, is what creates that feeling of just being completely overwhelmed.
It's the formula for overwhelm. Current physical painful sensations, PLUS, the pain story of the past, PLUS, the pain story of the future equals overwhelm. This narrative is the heavy backpack that makes a physical 410 pain feel like an emotional 1010 catastrophe.
So what's the practice? How do you drop the backpack?
The single most important step is just becoming aware that the story is playing. That's step one. Once you identify it, step two is practicing saying internally with compassion, "Thank you, not now." You acknowledge the story, but you gently choose not to engage. Step three is the redirect. Immediately moving your attention to a neutral present anchor, like your breath, the feeling of your feet on the ground, the sound of traffic. You're just politely refusing to give it your attention.
And when you interrupt that story, the actual raw sensation of pain often becomes much more tolerable. The catastrophizing was doing most of the damage.
It so often is. Look at Peter in the book. He had chronic lower back pain, made worse by sleepless nights, which just fueled his catastrophizing. When he practiced dropping the fear narrative, he realized his underlying physical pain was maybe a 3 or 4 out of 10. It was manageable. Similarly, Anna, who suffered from severe IBS flare-ups, she realized that without the history and the fear, the sensation itself, if viewed impartially, felt like just an upset stomach to an outsider, not the crippling crisis she had built in her mind.
Which leads to that journaling practice, which sounds like a great way to externalize the weight of the backpack.
It's profound. You write down the past story, the origin, the mistakes, the regrets. Then you write down the future story, the worries, the consequences. And then you ask yourself the critical question: do these stories ease my pain, or do they make it worse in this present moment? Externalizing it allows you to see the baggage objectively and choose what you're willing to keep carrying. And usually the answer is pretty clear. So once we've dealt with identity and the story, the next phase is about actively, gently reconnecting with the physical body. And that starts with interoception.
Interoception. The book defines that as the awareness of our internal bodies. It's how we feel inside. It's our bottom line feeling. Are we okay, or are we miserable?
Right. And for people living with chronic pain, the default habit is avoidance. Because the body hurts, the mind retreats into the head, into planning, analysis, fear. We try to suppress everything, the painful and the pleasant or neutral sensations. We get really good at dissociation.
And mindfulness reverses this. It helps counteract that negativity bias by teaching us to notice all the bodily sensations, including the neutral ones our brain usually just skips over because it's so focused on the danger signal.
This is the foundation for somatic tracking, which is an essential component of PRT for neuroclastic pain. The crucial detail here is that you practice it for short periods, 1 to 2 minutes, and only when the pain is mild or moderate. You never do this when the pain is flaring badly.
Okay, so what's the how-to? How exactly does someone track a sensation, especially if it's sharp or throbbing? And how do you convince your brain it's harmless?
You approach the sensation with deep, non-judgmental curiosity, like a scientist. You track its physical qualities. Is it sharp, dull, hot, buzzing, throbbing? Does it have a defined edge? You trace its boundaries. Then comes the non-negotiable step. While you're tracking, you mentally label the sensation not as pain, but as sensation or pressure, and you explicitly remind your brain, this sensation is harmless, it is uncomfortable, but it is safe.
That deliberate labeling interrupts the automatic fear response. That's the core training mechanism then. You're basically reprogramming the neural pathways away from automatic fear and resistance.
You are. Alan Gordon has a great analogy of a hearing aid. If your brain's perception of pain is like a hearing aid set to the maximum excruciating volume, somatic tracking is the deliberate attempt to reset that volume back to an appropriate lower level. The goal isn't to eliminate the feeling, it's non-threatening acceptance, which reduces the fear that fuels the pain.
The next phase of awareness involves breaking down pain itself, which in our heads is often this one solid, overwhelming, inescapable box.
Yes, a box shoved in the attic that's too heavy to move. Mindfulness asks us to open that box and look at what's inside. Pain is rarely just one thing. It's a complex phenomenon with 3 components. 1, the physical sensory part. 2, the emotional affective part, fear, sadness, anger. And 3, the cognitive analytical part, which is the story.
And when you break the box into those 3 components, it shifts from overwhelming to manageable because you realize only one part is the raw sensation itself.
And often, that raw sensation is much smaller than its mental footprint. The book shares the story of Robert, a high-powered executive with crippling, constant back pain. Through detailed sensory tracking, Robert realized the actual physical sensation, the sharp, throbbing part, was confined to an area about the size of a quarter.
A quarter. But in his mind, it must have felt like his entire back was on fire.
It did. But realizing the physical sensation was so localized was a massive turning point. Even more importantly, he was guided to notice what percentage of his body was not in pain. He realized 99.9% of his body was actually neutral or pain-free. His mind had just been habitually skipping over all those good moments.
That realization that even in moments of intense sensation, most of your being is actually okay. That's a huge perspective shift.
It is. The strategies for sensory tracking emphasize exactly this. Focus on the specific qualities of the pain, but also expand your awareness to the parts of your body that feel neutral or even pleasant. The cool air on your skin, the warmth of a coffee cup. You're shifting the internal ratio away from constant threat detection.
And this expanded, accepting awareness is what allows for the final shift in this section. Ending that emotional war with your body, that deep feeling of betrayal that leads to, I hate my body.
Chronic pain makes us treat our body like a broken car that needs fixing or punishment. This internal warfare creates so much physical tension, clenched jaws, hunched shoulders, which only makes the pain signals worse. The path to peace, Dr. Wolf suggests, is the A train. Acknowledge, allow E, accept, appreciate.
That progression, especially getting to appreciate, sounds like a lifelong journey. What does accept really mean in this context?
Acceptance here is the radical act of saying, this is my reality right now. I don't like it, but I'm going to stop fighting it. We see this with Amanda, who suffered from severe psoriasis and chronic joint pain. She feared acceptance was giving up, believing she had to be rigid to keep fighting the disease.
So she started with just acknowledge and allow.
Exactly. She just started by acknowledging the pain. This is a moment of pain, and it is hard connecting to her breath and consciously softening the tension in her shoulders or jaw. This shift from fighting to allowing created an immediate change in her internal environment. It lowered her stress response.
And the ultimate goal is appreciate.
Appreciate is the understanding that the body is doing its best, even when it's struggling. Over time, Amanda developed what she called a respectful and friendly working relationship with her body. She learned to listen to its limits as an ally, not an enemy. And this reduced her internal alarm system so much that her body responded. She reported less inflammation in her skin and joints. The end of the internal war actually improved her symptoms.
So once we start mastering how we relate to the physical sensation, the real work begins on the emotional terrain. And we have to address the strong connection between chronic pain and depression.
It's a profound connection, unfortunately. The neural pathways for pain and depression overlap significantly, creating this vicious cycle where pain worsens depression, and then the depression worsens the pain. The studies are sobering. Up to 50% of chronic pain sufferers also experience clinical depression.
And the hallmarks are that rumination, that hopelessness, the catastrophizing.
Absolutely. Thoughts like, I'm useless, I'm beyond hope, or my family would be better off without me are classic depressive loops. Mindfulness teaches us to see these thoughts not as defining capital T truths, but as simply brain activity.
Like an itch or a scent.
Exactly. You disengage. You interrupt the automatic pattern where that thought instantly leads to an identity crisis. You stop feeding at the ruminating DMN.
The book also identifies a classic trap that fuels both depression and pain flares. The boom-bust cycle.
This is such a devastating pattern. When your symptoms recede, that's the boom period, you're fueled by this euphoric thinking like, I'm finally better, I can catch up on everything I missed.
And you overdo it.
You overdo it to the point of exhaustion, which inevitably triggers a major flare-up and a crash, the bust. And this crash is followed by intense guilt and hopelessness, which feeds right back into the depressive spiral.
So how does mindfulness help break that cycle?
By promoting realistic self-awareness. Interoceptive monitoring. Instead of operating on euphoria, mindfulness allows you to check in with your body in the present moment. Kim, in the book, learned to notice the subtle signs that she was speeding up. A tightness in her chest, a hurried pace, and she made a conscious choice to slow down before the crash.
It's about making wiser choices, even if that means saying no to plans.
Yes, promoting a much steadier, more manageable experience.
Okay, next we have to discuss one of the most challenging suppressed emotions, grief. So many people with chronic pain fear that acknowledging the loss of identity, career, the life they expected is the same as giving up hope of ever getting better.
That fear is immensely powerful. Tanisha, a physician in the book, is a prime example. She had to give up her surgical career due to her chronic pain, and she constantly fought the sadness, convinced that grieving was capitulation. She felt that if she acknowledged the loss, she was confirming she was permanently broken. But the book argues that unfelt grief doesn't disappear. It festers. It turns into chronic depression or anxiety.
And the profound shift is realizing that grief is actually an act of honoring the loss.
It is the ultimate testament to what we valued. Grief happens because we valued the career or the function or the life we lost. The practice is not to solve the grief, but to allow it. It's about naming the emotion, this is grief, and inviting compassion for how much it hurts. When Tanisha finally allowed herself to name the grief and share it with a friend, it led to a good cry and the sense of lightness. She confirmed that feeling the grief is paradoxically the act of resilience, not capitulation.
Which leads us to its hotter counterpart, anger and resentment. Anger provides this false, intoxicating sense of power or control in a situation where we feel completely helpless.
It does, and it's often the hard emotion that's protecting those softer, scarier ones like fear or grief or hopelessness. But the physiological impact of anger is immediately detrimental to chronic pain. It puts the body straight into alarm state, fight or flight.
Increases tension, heart rate, adrenaline.
Which is a massive inflammatory trigger. Ralph, a patient with arthritis, described anger as like a form of inflammation in my mind that worsened the inflammation of his joints. Anger is physically damaging.
And chronic anger can turn into that debilitating resentment or bitterness, trapping you in the past. It's that old saying, anger is like picking up a hot coal to throw at another person. You're the only one who gets burned.
The mindfulness approach is really sophisticated. It's about listening to anger as a consultant. A loud, demanding one, but a consultant. You acknowledge it, this is what anger feels like, and you focus on the immediate physical sensations without engaging in the story that's fueling it. George, a veteran who struggled with severe anger, learned to notice the physical signature first. His hands clenching, his face getting warm, his jaw tightening.
So those physical cues become the signal to interrupt the mental story.
Exactly. He created a wide corral around the feeling. He wouldn't act on the story. He would just let the raw, hot feeling dissipate naturally, which subsequently reduced his headaches and neck pain. And only when the anger subsided could the softer emotions, the sadness or fear hiding behind it, start to emerge and be processed.
So if anger is turning away from pain by fighting, numbing out and addiction are about eliminating it entirely. And given the crisis we talked about, this section is vital.
It is. The drive to numb pain is a primary fuel behind the opioid epidemic. For those recovering from prescription addiction, the practices of mindfulness-based relapse prevention, or MBRP, offer powerful tools, especially one called urge surfing.
I love that term, urge surfing. How does it work?
Omar, a young veteran in the book recovering from prescription addiction, found this to be his most powerful tool. The core idea is that you cannot get rid of a craving by arguing with it or suppressing it or judging it. That just makes it stronger. Instead, you treat the craving like a massive wave that you just have to ride out.
You observe the wave, knowing it will eventually pass.
Yes. You focus only on the minute-by-minute physical sensations of the urge, the tightness in your chest, the restlessness, the quickened thinking. You observe these without engaging with the story, that desperate internal voice insisting the urge will never end until it's fulfilled. By allowing the wave to crest and fall, focusing only on the physical part, the urge naturally subsides. Omar combined this with radical self-kindness, and it became his most lasting tool for recovery.
And finally, in this emotional landscape, we come back to the prison of resentment and the liberating practice of forgiveness.
Holding on to past anger, whether it's against a negligent doctor, a careless driver, or most commonly against yourself, it just tortures the bearer. Resentment is a painful prison we build around ourselves. The book quotes Jack Kornfield with this magnificent, heartbreaking summary. Forgiveness is giving up all hope for a better past.
That quote is just.
Oh.
It's letting go of the demand that the past should have been different.
It is. The story of Harry in the book illustrates this perfectly. Harry was injured from a fall, sued the company, and won a massive settlement. But he remained furious, bitter, trapped. His pastor shared the story of a POW who realized he was still a captive because he refused to forgive his captors. Harry realized he was still in the prison of his own mind.
So forgiveness isn't about condoning what happened. It's about freeing yourself from the emotional continuation of it.
It's a deliberate, often slow process of releasing that painful need to hold on to the past. Dr. Wolf outlines the traditional practice of forgiveness in 3 iterations. First, asking forgiveness from those we've harmed. Second, forgiving those who have harmed us. And third, forgiving ourselves, which, for many who blame themselves for their physical state, is often the hardest part. The invisible nature of chronic pain creates a whole new category of suffering, and that comes from social interaction, specifically dealing with ignorance and microaggressions.
Because the pain is internal, people so frequently encounter these clueless or suggestive or just downright hurtful remarks. You don't look sick. It's all in your head. Or you're too young to be in that much pain.
These are intensely invalidating. Martin, who had severe rheumatoid arthritis, was constantly told he looked too muscular to be in pain, and it forced him into this exhausting cycle of having to justify his reality to skeptical people. The book calls the cumulative impact of these remarks a death by 1,000 paper cuts.
That's a perfect analogy. It captures the draining, chronic nature of it.
It is draining, and it has a negative inflammatory effect on the nervous system. The stress of having to defend your existence makes the pain worse. And this is especially true for people in marginalized groups like Maria, a Latina woman with endometriosis who had to deal with the stereotype of the lazy Latina on top of her physical agony. The social trauma multiplies the physical pain.
So what's the mindfulness strategy? I mean, you can't constantly educate everyone you meet. How do you protect yourself without becoming totally isolated?
The first step is to use mindfulness to label the remark internally as a microaggression or just ignorance. This lets you step back from immediately internalizing it and realize the remark says more about the other person's limited perspective than it does about your reality. Second, you immediately offer yourself self-compassion. It's so painful to be on the receiving end of a remark like that again. This calms the nervous system.
And the third step involves a conscious choice.
Yes. Once you're centered, you decide whether to speak up, to educate, or to let it slide. Crucially, the choice isn't driven by automatic reactivity, but by conscious wisdom. If speaking up will cause more stress than it relieves, silence is often the wiser choice. You do not owe anyone an explanation of your pain.
And what if we're the insensitive one? What if someone listening realizes they've made a remark like that to a friend?
The book gives crucial guidance here. Listen without defending yourself. You have to acknowledge the difference between your good intention, I was just trying to help, and the hurtful impact. Apologize sincerely, validate their experience, and critically do not jump to giving unsolicited advice.
The deep dive also wisely looks at the other side of this dynamic, supporting the caregiver. The burden on them is often invisible.
It is so often overlooked, but the suffering extends far beyond the patient. Studies suggest that the caregiving partner can sometimes be even worse off, facing higher risks of burnout, severe depression, profound isolation. Their life changes so radically out of love and loyalty.
So the mindfulness practice for caregivers focuses on self-care and the concept of equanimity.
Caregivers typically suppress their own difficult emotions, frustration, anger, sheer exhaustion out of guilt. They feel they shouldn't complain. Mindfulness allows them to acknowledge these feelings without that guilt. A part of me feels really frustrated right now, and that's okay. That radical self-care is essential to prevent emotional collapse.
The book uses the analogy of a drowning person, which really shifts the perspective for the caregiver.
It does. A person who is drowning doesn't need someone else crying and drowning alongside them. They need someone compassionate and clear-thinking who is strong enough to throw them a life raft. The key question for the caregiver is my pain and emotional turmoil helping my partner right now? The goal is to cultivate compassionate presence, which is far more sustainable than debilitating empathy. The equanimity practice helps untangle that shared pain with phrases like, I am not the cause of your struggle, and it isn't in my power to end your suffering, but I can be present.
Finally, we address that almost universal human tendency toward the comparing mind. For someone with chronic pain, this can become self-torture.
Absolutely. Julia, in the book, suffered from polyautoimmune syndrome and found herself scrolling social media, constantly comparing her limited life to her friends' vacations and careers. She said she ended up feeling pretty worthless and horrible. Comparing is a natural social mechanism, but here, it's self-inflicted pain.
And this is beautifully reconciled by the Holland analogy.
It's one of the most memorable analogies in the book. We all planned for Italy, the healthy, vibrant, pain-free life we assumed we'd have, but the plane landed in Holland, a life with chronic pain. If we keep fighting the reality of Holland, wishing we were in Italy, we miss the unique beauty that Holland offers. The tulips, the Rembrandts, the deep connections forged through struggle.
So the mindfulness practice is to redirect the energy spent on wishing we were elsewhere.
Exactly. When the comparing mind arises, you just note it internally. Comparing mind. You acknowledge the pain that comes with it, and you gently return your attention to a neutral anchor. You can't change the past dream of Italy, but you can choose to experience the present reality of Holland without the massive, unnecessary, added pain of comparison. Our final section really moves into how we integrate all of these practices to find a sense of wholeness despite the challenges. And this begins with acknowledging the neurological wiring that works against us, the negativity bias.
Rick Hanson's famous saying captures this perfectly. The mind is like Velcro for negative experiences and Teflon for positive experiences.
Danger and pain stick to our memory system. Pleasant moments disappear almost immediately. In chronic pain, the system constantly reinforces the pain, difficult, and fear jars in our brain. It drowns out any positive events and leads to this persistent false sense that hardly any good things ever happen to me anymore. This is just brain wiring designed for survival, not happiness.
So we have to actively train the brain to make that Teflon into Velcro, to tune the ordinary into the extraordinary.
That's the practice of intense savoring, like the famous raisin exercise. Paying full, non-judgmental attention to something small and ordinary, like when a raisin savoring the flavor, texture, scent, makes it extraordinary. This intentional focus creates a strong, positive memory trace. It forces the brain to register joy. And this leads directly to the practice of collecting pearls.
Collecting pearls is a specific daily intention.
It is. It's about setting the intention from the moment you wake up to find pleasant moments. Not massive victories, but tiny pearls. The taste of a cup of tea, the softness of a blanket, a kind word from a stranger. You have to savor these moments and intentionally store the memory for later recall. Elizabeth, who suffered from debilitating chronic facial pain, was skeptical at first. She felt she'd lost all joy. But by practicing this, she had a powerful realization. Yes, there was the pain interwoven at the same time. There were always moments of joy, connection, and gratitude.
So the pain didn't disappear, but it stopped taking up all the space in her experience.
It created dual awareness. The presence of pain did not negate the presence of joy.
Next, we approach the ultimate paradox from Dr. Wolf, and it's the one that is hardest to swallow, the invitation to stop trying to get better.
It sounds so counterintuitive to the entire ethos of chronic pain management, but it's central to finding peace. The desperate struggle to get better suggests that as long as the pain is present, we are fundamentally not okay. And this creates constant stress. Stress, as we know, suppresses the immune system and actively slows any healing process.
It's about letting go of the urgency and the pressure. Carl Rogers spoke to this idea.
He did. He said, "The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change." You stop desperately chasing a future outcome. We distinguish here between curing, which is eliminating the disease, and healing, which is the restoration of wholeness and integrity in the face of the disease. We can choose to live well, fully, and meaningfully in the presence of the condition.
So healing is a mindset, not necessarily a physical outcome.
It is. The Zen perspective holds that healing involves clearing the pathway to the open heart and identifying with a vaster sense of being, not just the suffering, constrained body. The practice is a radical invitation. Let go of the pressure, the urgency, and just allow yourself to be okay right now, regardless of whether the physical pain resolves tomorrow.
And finally, we arrive at the profound concept of making meaning, turning the struggle into growth.
We come back to Viktor Frankl. When we cannot change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves by finding meaning and dignity in our response. This is often achieved by unwedging the two arrows. The first arrow is the physical pain, the inevitable hit. The second arrow is all the multiplying pain from our thoughts, judgments, and resistance, that inner voice saying, "I can't believe this is still happening, this is unfair."
And mindfulness focuses entirely on removing that self-inflicted second arrow.
By removing the resistance, we transform the experience. Thich Nhat Hanh's analogy encapsulates this beautiful transformation. No mud, no lotus. The compost of broken dreams, pain, and loss is the very material that can, if we allow it, transform the heart and mind into unexpected beauty, compassion, and authenticity. We don't choose the mud, but we choose how we relate to it.
And the final, inspiring case study of Vidyamala Birch confirms that this isn't just a philosophical theory.
Vidyamala Birch, confined to a wheelchair with high levels of physical pain and paralysis after 2 broken backs, chose this path. Despite immense physical limitations and constant pain, she transformed her life by adopting and teaching mindfulness. She became a meaningful teacher and inspired a worldwide community. Her life proves that a full, contributory, and meaningful existence is absolutely possible in the presence of chronic pain.
This deep dive into mindfulness and self-compassion for chronic pain has provided such a detailed, actionable roadmap for changing our fundamental relationship with physical suffering. The key practices we've explored are so powerful, shifting your identity from "I am my pain" to "I am experiencing pain," actively dismantling that heavy burden of the pain story and just diligently cultivating a non-resistant relationship with all the components of suffering.
We've established that this mind training isn't a replacement for medical care, but it's a complementary, science-backed method supported by all that PRT data that often allows for a significant reduction in suffering, and consequently a reduction in the need for pharmacological interventions as that emotional pain decreases. These practices are true allies.
And the ultimate implication of Dr. Wolf's work is that what we start doing for ourselves, that inner work of healing the relationship with our own bodies, it just spills over. It improves our external world, our relationships, our connections. It helps us show up as the strongest version of ourselves, even when we're constrained.
We talked about how chronic pain can be the mud that produces the lotus of a meaningful life. So the final thought for you to explore is this. How might you apply the practice of making meaning, not just to your current struggles, but to a seemingly meaningless or painful event from your past that you previously just dismissed? Can you revisit an old first arrow, a past injury, a betrayal, a profound disappointment, and use your current awareness to remove that second arrow of resentment or regret, transforming that old pain into a quiet source of strength today?
Thank you for joining us for this crucial deep dive. We hope this knowledge serves you well on your own journey toward wholeness.